This is your college algebra test 1 review video. So the first review problem looks like this. 3/2 x plus 1/4 equals 1/3 x minus 1/6. So the first step is to find the least common denominator of the denominators, which are 2, 4, 3, and 6. So the number 12 is the smallest number that all the denominators will divide into. So the best strategy, therefore, for solving this problem is to put parentheses around each of these terms and multiply them each by the LCD. So 12, 12, 12, and 12. And then we're going to actually find out that this eliminates all those fractions, because you see this 2 divides into this 12 and gives you 6. And this 4 divides into this 12 and gives you 3. This 3 divides into this 12 and gives you 4. This 6 divides into this 12 and gives you 2. Now, what we have next is we have 6 times 3x plus 1 times 3 equals 4 times 1x minus 1 times 2. So if I simplify that, then I'll get 18x plus 3 equals 4x minus 2. So I'm going to start with the smallest x and get rid of that. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. That leaves me with 14x plus 3 equals negative 2. Now I'll move the number over the 3 so that x is more by itself. So subtract 3 from both sides, and then you'll be left with 14x equals negative 5. And at this point, you're going to divide it by 14 on both sides. So this 14 crosses itself out, and you're left with x equals negative 5/14. So the answer is, the solution set is negative 5/14. Now let's go ahead and look at another example problem for your test review. And this one is problem 2. So problem 2 says 3 absolute value of y plus 2 minus 12 equals 0. 3 absolute value of y plus 2 minus 12 equals 0. So now I'm going to add 12 to both sides. Our goal is to get the absolute value by itself. And then well, 3 absolute value of y plus 2 equals positive 12. Then we're going to divide by 3 on both sides, which cancels out that 3 on the left. And we will be left with absolute value of y plus 2 equals 4. And when you solve an absolute value equation, with the absolute value, the quantity can only equal a positive number. If it equals a negative number, then there's no solution. So the way to solve it is you take away the absolute value signs, and then it could now equal a positive or a negative number. So it could equal a positive or a negative 4. Then you're going to move this positive 2 to that side, and therefore it will become negative 2. So your next step is to say y equals negative 2 plus or minus 4. And then there's really 2 answers. So y equals negative 2 minus 4, which is negative 6, or y equals negative 2 plus 4, which is positive 2. So the solution set is negative 6 and 2. And you just put a comma between them. Now let's go ahead and do a third example problem for the test review. This one says 8 minus 6 absolute value of 7x plus 1 absolute value equals 13. So what I'm going to do is, see, this is a negative term, so I'm going to move this term to that side, so it'll become positive 6 absolute value of 7x plus 1 when you move it to the right side. But then I'm going to move this 13 to this side, so it'll become negative 13. So then I'll have 8 minus 13 equals 6, positive 6 absolute value of 7x plus 1. Then I'm going to combine the 8 minus 13, which is negative 5. And then 6 absolute value of 7x plus 1. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 6 to get the absolute value by itself. So then now I have negative 5/6 by itself equals, and then the 6 crosses out, so it equals the absolute value of 7x plus 1. Now, as I remarked in the last problem that we did, example 2, the absolute value has a solution only if the absolute value is equal to a positive number or a 0, but if the absolute value equals a negative number, that's impossible, so there's no solution to this problem. So due to the fact we got the absolute value by itself already, and it's equal to a negative sign already, that means that there's no solution because this is not possible. So the solution set is the empty set. So there's no solution, or you could also say it's the empty set. There's no solutions in the set of solutions, so the solution set is empty, the empty solution set, which sometimes they use it as a 0 with a diagonal line through it, like that. So that means a set of no solutions at all. All right, well, let's look at a fourth example for your test. So problem 4 says 6 over x minus 5 plus 7 over x plus 5 equals 13x minus 5 over x squared minus 25. Well, if you remember in intermediate algebra, I talked a lot about how that you'll use factoring to solve harder types of problems. So we need to look at this denominator and factor that out. So we can break it apart into 2 pairs of parentheses. The x squared can break apart into x times x. The negative 25 can break apart into negative 5 times positive 5. And then we can actually rewrite this equation, therefore. We can erase that, which is the original problem, and replace it with something better, which is the factored problem, x minus 5 times x plus 5. So once I've done that, now it's easy to see how we can get, how we can solve the equation. So we're going to, once again, whenever you have fractions in an equation, you want to find the least common denominator. So the least common denominator is the denominator that has every one of the other littler denominators inside of it. So, which would be x minus 5 times x plus 5. But now we're going to put each of these terms in a pair of parentheses. We're going to multiply each of those terms by the least common denominator, which is x minus 5 times x plus 5. And then x minus 5 times x plus 5. And then x minus 5 times x plus 5. Once I've done that, then all the fractions will cancel out. So this x minus 5 factor in the bottom of that crosses out that factor on the top of it. Then the x plus 5 crosses out the x plus 5. And then this crosses out this, and this crosses out this. So the next step is I have 6 times x plus 5. And I have plus 7 times x minus 5. And then I have equals. Now the 13x minus 5 is times nothing, because there's nothing else, because everything that was multiplied by it has been canceled out, because there were 2 things in the bottom of it that canceled out both of the things that were multiplied by it. So now I start simplifying. 6 times x is 6x, 6 times 5 is 30. 7 times x is 7x, 7 times negative 5 is negative 35, equals 13x minus 5. And I combine the like terms, so 6x plus 7x is 13x, 30 minus 35 is negative 5, and then this equals 13x minus 5 on the other side. So if I subtract 13, I usually start with x's. I subtract 13x from both sides, then I would get that would cancel and that would cancel. Then if I'll get -5 equals -5, and then I'll add 5 to both sides to get rid of that. Then I'll get 0 equals 0 equals 0. Hold on, my pencil is not working very good. 0 equals 0. So if you get 0 equals 0, then this is actually always true, except in certain cases though. So x could be any value. X is equal to any number, any solution, except for there's two solutions that don't work, because any solution except so hold on, instead of the word except, let me say it. Any solution but x cannot equal +5, because if x equals +5, then in the first fraction of the original problem, you would have had 5 minus 5 in the denominator, which would be 0 in the denominator, and you're not allowed to have 0 in the denominator. So x cannot equal 5, but also x cannot equal -5 either, because if you had -5 inside of this denominator, -5 in that denominator would be -5 plus 5, which would be 0 in that denominator, and you're not allowed to have 0 in that denominator either. So the answer can be any solution except for x does not equal -5 or +5. Now, let's just see here. And now we're going to do the fifth example problem, which is c equals y plus h minus 4 times w. And it could tell you to solve this for any letter. So in this problem, I'm going to solve it for the letter h. So first of all, we have to simplify it. So distribute this w, you'll get hw minus 4w, and then plus y equals c. Now we want to get the h alone, so we're going to keep the c on the left side, but we're going to move the y that's on the right side to the left, so then it'll become -y. And then we're going to move the -4w that's on the right to be on the left, so therefore it's going to become +4w. And then on the right, we'll keep the hw on the right, so the letter with h in it is only on one side. Then we're going to factor out the w from the h, like this. Then we're going to divide both sides by the w. So the w is going to go away, and the h will be by itself. H equals c minus y plus 4w over w. C minus y plus 4w over w. And then you circle that. Actually, the answer key already has the h is already there on the problem where you put the answer in the box. So for the answer that you fill in, you only have to put in the c minus y plus 4w over w. All right, now let's do problem 6. So problem 6 is a really important problem called the working together problem. So if two people work together, let's just call them person A and person B, then 1 over the time it takes for person A plus 1 over the time it takes for person B, that equals 1 over the time it takes for them to work together. So if let's just call them Trent and Lois. So Trent is person A, and they can deliver the newspapers in 20 minutes. And Lois is person B, and she can deliver the newspapers in 30 minutes. So if they work together, how long will it take them? So person A is Trent, so put 1 over 20. Person B is Lois, so put 1 over 30. And then you want to know how long it will take them together, but you don't know how long it will take them, so you don't know what to put in for t. So t is the unknown value. the unknown value. Now what we'll do is we'll find the least common denominator, just like we always do when we're solving fractions inside of equations. So 30 and 20 both go into 60, and then t goes into t, so that LCD is 60t. So we're going to put each of these terms into parentheses. We're going to multiply them each by 60t, 60t, and 60t. Then we're going to reduce them. So 20 goes into 60 3 times and leaves you with 3t. 30 goes into 60 2 times and leaves you with 2t. And then t cancels into the t and leaves you with only a 60. Then you're left with 1 times 3t plus 1 times 2t equals 1 times 60. That's what you're left with. But the fractions are gone. So that's the great thing. So 1 times 3t is 3t. 1 times 2t is 2t. 1 times 60 is 60. So 3t plus 2t is 5t. So you get 5t equals 60. Then divide by 5 on both sides. You get t equals 12. There we go. So it takes them 12 minutes to deliver the newspapers if they work together and they both work just as fast as they normally do. And now, of course, if they talked to each other or something like that, or got distracted, it might take longer. But if they worked together and they didn't slow down, then it would take them 12 minutes to deliver the same amount of newspapers together. Now, problem 7. Problem 7 says, how much water must be added to a 6-liter solution? Okay, so the 7%, you have a 7% solution and you have 6 liters of it, right? And then you want to know how much water needs to be added. So water is just pure water, so that's 0%, right? So how much water means X. So how much water needs to be added to a 7% solution that has 6 liters to get a total solution that contains 2%, right? So the 2% solution, if you mix together 6 gallons plus X gallons, you'll have 6 plus X gallons of solution. So basically you start with 7% of solution that has 6 liters, and then you have pure water, which is 0% solution. You add some pure water to it, and then after you mix it together, you have 2% solution, and the number of liters is 6 liters plus X liters. So logically, this is an equation that says if you have 7% of 6 liters plus 0% of X liters, then the result is equal to 2% of 6 plus X liters. So I'm going to simplify this. So 6 times 0.07 is 0.42. 0 times X is just 0. Then this times this is 0.12. And this times this is 0.02X. Now I'm going to subtract 0.12 from both sides. So then I'll get 0.30, subtract this, and I'll get 0.02X. So I'm going to move over here. So if I rewrite that, I'll have 0.30 equals 0.02X. Then I need to get the X by itself, so I'll divide by the 0.02 like this, which will give me 15 equals X. So the answer is the amount of water, the pure water that needs to be added, is X equals 15 liters. So the solution is 15 liters. Now we're going to go to a different kind of problem for number 8. So 16, -2, and 1, 6. So we're now talking about the distance and the midpoint formula. So the distance formula is simply equal to the square root of the difference between the second x value and the first x value subtracted squared plus the difference between the second x value minus the second y value minus the first y value subtracted squared. So it actually is kind of like the Pythagorean theorem. It's kind of like the square root of a squared plus b squared. So if the distance between the x values is like the bottom side, and the difference between the two y values of the points are like b, so if you have 1 point here and 1 point here, the distance between this x value, the difference between this x value and this x value is called x2 minus x1. And then the difference between this y value and that y value is called y2 minus y1. And if you do the square root of, according to the Pythagorean theorem, if you do the square root of a squared plus b squared, you'll get the third side of this triangle, which represents the distance between the 2 points themselves. So the distance formula is really based on the Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to use that formula, and it's going to be x2, which is 1, minus x1, which is 16, squared, plus y2 minus y1 squared. And when you subtract a negative, it becomes positive. So the second one is really 6 plus 2, which is 8. And then 1 minus 16 is negative 15. So you get that. Now negative 15 squared is 225. Hit positive 225. 8 squared is 64. And 225 plus 64 is 4 plus 5 is 9. 6 plus 2 is 8. And 2 plus nothing is 2. That's 289. And the square root of 289 is equal to 17. This is awesome. So the distance is equal to 17. So that's the first answer. And now the midpoint. So let me go ahead and erase the distance part of it so I can do the midpoint now. So the midpoint formula, it looks scary and complicated, but it's really not that complicated. So the midpoint formula, it's actually just the average of the 2 points. So the midpoint is just simply the average of the first two numbers, the x's. So you add them up and divide by 2. And then it's the average of the second two numbers. You add them up and you divide them by 2 to get the average. So that equals 17 over 2, and then 4 over 2. And that breaks down to be 17 halves, comma, 2. So the midpoint formula, if you write it down like a formula, it looks really frightening. It says x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And then it says y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So it looks scary, but it's not scary because if you understand what it means, all you're really doing is just taking the average of x1 and x2, and you're taking the average of y1 and y2. So you're just taking the average of the 2 points. So the answer is the midpoint is an ordered pair, so there's parentheses around it, 17 halves, comma 2. Perfect. Now let's try problem 9. So problem 9 says x minus 2 squared equals 8 minus y plus 2 squared. Well, this is not in the right form. This negative y plus 2 squared needs to get moved over to be on the same side as the x minus 2 squared. And if it's negative on that side and I move it over, then it will be positive like that. So there we go. Now this is actually a circle. This is a circle. So it's a circle. Yay. Now the midpoint of a circle is actually just the opposite of this. So positive 2, and the opposite of that. So negative 2. So the center of the circle, or the midpoint of the circle, you could say, is just 2, negative 2 in an ordered pair. The radius of a circle is equal to the square root of that number right there. So the radius equals the square root of 8. And the square root of 8, like I've taught you in intermediate algebra, can break apart into the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. And the square root of 4 is 2. And the other square root of 2 doesn't break down. So the answer is 2 square root of 2. And now you have to choose the correct graph. So on a graph, the center is going to be over 2 and down 2. So that's the center point right there. And then the square, 2 times the square root of 2 is roughly about 2.8. So 2.8, so go about 2.8 units up, so about right there, 2.8 units left, and then 2.8 units right. So 1, 2, 2.8, 2.8 units down, 1, 2, and then a little bit more. So if you draw the circle with the radius of 2.8, it's going to look about like that. So you're going to choose the multiple choice graph that looks the closest that you can to having a center point of 2, -2, and a radius of 2 square root of 2. And now let's go ahead to a 10th example problem for your test. So problem 10 says you have a circle that has a center of 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's a circle whose center is at 4 and -7. So you'll have to look really carefully for that. And then the edge of it is up there at -2. So that's, whoops, I'm sorry, I did that wrong. Went too far. So that's the way it looks. That. So based on that graph, you're supposed to write the equation of the circle. So how do you write the equation of a circle from the graph of a circle? First of all, you look very, 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 very carefully at it. So you look at the center point, that point, which by the way, the center point isn't actually there. So you'll have to carefully look at the graph to identify where the center point really is. So this center point is actually at x equals 4 and y equals -6. X equals 4, y equals -6. And then you have to carefully look at the radius. So how far is it from the middle point right here to this point right there? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait, hold on. 1, 1. Okay, I think I actually went down too far. Hold on. Let me erase those. 1. So 1, 2, 3. Whoops. 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I think I drew too many of those blue things. So the center had too many lines on it. It's really at -6 for the y value. So if I count how many dots there are between the middle and the top edge of the circle, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a distance of 4. So the radius equals 4. So the standard equation of a circle is equal to parentheses x parentheses squared plus parentheses y parentheses squared equals, and then it's the square of the radius. So the square of this radius is equal to, so if r equals 4, then r squared equals 16. So the square of the radius is 16. So this number is supposed to be 16. And then in the parentheses, you have the opposite of the center. So instead of x plus 4, you do the opposite. So it's really supposed to be x minus 4. And then in the y, instead of y minus 6, it's the opposite. So the correct equation is y plus 6. So the answer to this problem is parentheses x minus 4 squared plus parentheses y plus 6 squared equals 16. And then each of the other parts of this problem is the same. However, there's one that's a little bit tricky though. So I'm going to do so that was part A, but I'm also going to do part D of problem 10. So part D of problem 10 says that you just have a big circle like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the circle goes all the way out to 8 and all the way out to 8 and -8 and -8. So what in the world do you do if the circle has a center of 0? Well, you still do the same thing. You still do x plus y, and you have squares on the outside, and then you have, then you have the radius squared. So, well, if this goes out to 8 and this goes up to 8, then the center is at 0, 0, 0, 0, then the radius is 8. So you're going to just say r squared equals 8 times 8 is 64. So the right side of the equation becomes 64. And the left side of the equation, you just say x minus 0 and y minus 0, because the opposite of 0 is -0. However, though, you see y minus 0 is still y, and x minus 0 is really just still x. So you can simplify this to just be x squared plus y squared. X squared plus y squared equals 64. So that's how you can get the equation for the part D that's probably centered at 0, 0. Now let's go to problem 11. So problem 11, it says, find the slope between the 2 points, and then it gives you some points, like -1, 3 and 7, -4. So to find the slope between 2 points, you're going to use the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So y2 is -4 and y1 is 3. So y2 means the second y value, y1 means the first y value. x2 is 7 and x1 is -1, which means the second x value and the first x value. -4 minus 3 is -7, and then 7 minus -1 is really 7 plus 1. And 7 plus 1 is really equal to 8. So the answer is the slope is -7 over 8. Now let's do problem 12. So problem 12 gives you a graph, and you're supposed to find the equation of the graph. So the graph crosses through, for example, 1, let's say, on the y-axis, and then it goes down, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it goes right 4 and down 6. So it goes, so this one right there is 4 units right, and then down to -6. So we're going to find the equation of this line. We need to identify 2 things. We need to find the slope, and we need to find the y-intercept. Well, the y-intercept, which is spelled intercept, the y-intercept is just the value that touches the y-axis. So if I finish drawing the line, the only time the line touches the y-axis is at y equals 1. So the y-intercept is 1. But the slope is more complicated, because the slope means we have to start from the first dot and count how much up or down it goes. So if you start from the first dot and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it goes 7 down. So the amount down it goes is -7 actually. And then you count how far forwards it goes. So if you go back to the first point right here, you go forwards, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. So the amount forwards is 4. So slope is defined as, slope represents vertical change over horizontal change, which some people say is equal to rise over run. So this one goes downwards, which is a negative rise, and it goes forwards, which is a positive run. So the slope is -7 over 4. Now, once you know the slope and the y-intercept, then it's easy to find the equation. The equation of a line is written in slope-intercept form as y equals mx plus b. So you put the slope where the letter m is. So you're going to say y equals negative 7 over 4 times x. Now, when you're typing this into the computer for your answer, make sure that you don't accidentally put the x in the bottom of the fraction, because when you're typing it out, it'll start putting you in the bottom of the fraction. So make sure you use the arrow key or your mouse to go over and put the x beside the fraction instead of the bottom of the fraction. And then you just add the y-intercept. So your final answer is y equals negative 7/4 x plus 1. So that's perfect. Now let's try number 13. So problem 13, and it says the line that's parallel to 5x minus 7y equals 35. And it contains the 0.52. So what parallel means in terms of an equation of a line is that the numbers that are in front of the letters, they can stay the exact same, because those two numbers in front of the letters, if they stay the same, then the line will be parallel. So if I want a parallel line, I can write 5x minus 7y. However, though, a parallel line doesn't necessarily equal the same height, the same number. So for example, you could have this line down there, and then you could have another line up there. Those lines are both parallel, but this one might be at 35, but this one down here might only be at 7. So the number that's not beside a letter could be different, even if the lines are parallel. So how do I find out what that number is so that I can finish the equation? It's actually really simple, because the equation contains x equals 5 and it contains y equals 2. So all you have to do is plug those numbers in for x and plug them in for y, and then you'll actually know the number. So 5 times 5 is 25, minus 7 times 2 is 14. 25 minus 14 is 11. Now you can't just write 11 for the answer, because 11 is not the whole answer. You're supposed to write the equation. So the equation still says 5x minus 7y, but the number on the other side that you did not know before, we now know it's 11. So the answer to the question is 5x minus 7y equals 11. Now let's try to do problem 14 on the review. So 14 says a company paid $120,000 for a new 18-wheeler truck. And then when it's 10 years old, it'll only be worth $10,000. So using straight line depreciation, so when it's new, that's worth $120,000. So use straight line depreciation to find the value of the truck. So we have to find the rise over the run. So the new value really represents when the age of the truck is 0. The value of the truck, which is y, is 120,000. And 10 years old means when the age of the truck is 0, which is x, the value of the truck is 10,000. So we need to use a formula to find the slope. So the formula to find the slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So it's going to be y2, which is $10,000, minus y1, which is $120,000, divided by x2, which is 10, minus x1, which is 0. So 10,000 minus 120,000 is negative 110,000. And then divide by 10, so negative 110,000 divided by 10 is negative 11,000. So that's the slope, which we call m. So the slope m is equal to negative 11,000. Now the value of the truck is new at the very beginning, right? So when x equals 0, right, then y equals $120,000. So the graph of this truck starts out at a value that's on the y-axis which is 120,000. But remember, the value that's on the y-axis is the value that's on the y-axis is the y-intercept, right? Wherever the graph is on the y-axis, that's the y-intercept. And so the y-intercept is equal to $120,000. And we know the formula for the line is mx plus b. So we're going to put m first, negative 11,000 times x plus b. B is $120,000. Now there's only one problem though. So this problem says that the value of the age of truck in years, it's in years old. So x, you have to plug in the letter n for the age of the truck, which is x. So I'm going to take the letter n, erase this letter x, and put in the letter n. So now my answer is the value of the truck when it's n years old is equal to negative 11,000 n plus 120,000. So that right there is my final answer. Perfect. Now let's try number 15. So 15. So 15 says 8x squared plus 10x minus 7 equals 0. And it says solve this equation by using factoring. So factoring is an amazing, wonderful thing to know. And if you remember in intermediate algebra, we talked about what to do if there was no greatest common factor. So the number 8, there's no common factor with 8, 10, and 7. So there's a common factor of 8 and 10, but there's not a common factor with all 3 of them. So when that happens, what you have to do, you basically, sometimes you call this the rainbow method. So you draw a pretty rainbow from the first number to the last number. So you multiply them together. So 8 times negative 7 equals negative 56. Then after the rainbow happens, then the sun shines down and you break the negative 56 apart into a pair of numbers from which you can get 10. So you could do 1 and 56, or 2 and 2 times 28, or let's see, 4 times 14. Okay, that might work. So look at the 4 and the 14. Now I think if I subtracted them, I could get 10. However, though, you need to make sure that you know the signs correctly. So let's go figure this out. So when you're factoring a trinomial and it has a positive number in front and then everything else is good, what you do is in the first parentheses, you can put the same sign that you had at the beginning. So what sign did I have in the middle of the problem? Positive. So you can put a positive. Then now multiply these signs together. This positive times this negative. What's a positive times a negative? It's a negative, right? Now, you can put this pair of numbers, 4 and 14, now that you know one of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative, you can just put the bigger one in the first parentheses. So just put the bigger one first, the smaller one second. And then as long as you put the signs in the same order that the problem had, like I just showed you, as long as you do it that way, then they'll add up to equal 10. So 14 plus negative 4 adds up to 10. Now, the rest of this problem, though, I'm not sure if you remember this from intermediate algebra, or you might have had a different teacher for intermediate algebra. So what you do factoring it is you are going to put something in the beginning of the parentheses. So first of all, you see this little square on the x squared. You drop that square, but you keep everything else. You're going to put 8x plus 14, and then 8x minus 4. But that's not all, though. This answer is wrong, which is why I wrote it in red. It's wrong because I'm not finished. In order to finish it, you have to divide each of these by any common factor that they have. If they don't have a common factor, then you're good. But whenever they do, you have to divide by it, or else the answer is wrong. So this has a common factor of 2. This has a common factor of 4. So once I'm dividing by it. I'm going to write the answer in green now because now it's right. So 8x plus 14 divided by 2 is 4x plus 7, and 8x minus 4 is 2x minus 1. So those are the correct factors. Now that's not really the answer yet, because what have I done by factoring it? All I've done is to break the big hard problem apart into an easier equation. So if I've broken the problem apart, it still represents an equation though. It represents 4x plus 7 times 2x minus 1 equals 0. However, though, once something is equal to 0 and you've factored out the other side, then you can actually set this part alone equal to 0, and then you can set this part alone equal to 0. And then you've broken the hard problem into two easy problems, which that's the purpose of factoring. So subtract 7, 4x equals negative 7. Divide by 4, and you get x equals negative 7 over 4. Then solve the other one, so add 1 to both sides. 2x equals 1, divide by 2, we'll get x equals 1/2. So the two answers to the problem, which they should probably just be written together with a comma between them, but don't put parentheses around them though, because if you put parentheses around two numbers, it means x and then y. So just write the numbers down, 1/2 and then comma, negative 7/4. So that right there is your final solution, 1/2, comma, negative 7/4. Now let's do problem 16. So problem 16 says, parentheses, x minus 1/2 squared equals 81/4. So there's something really helpful called the square root property. The square root property says that if you have a quantity squared equal to a number, that the quantity equals, you can basically take the square root of both sides. The quantity equals positive or negative the square root of that number on the other side. So it only works though if you don't have an x in the number. So if that number right there has an x in it or a variable in it, if it has a variable that you're solving for in it, then that can't happen because you can't have the variable that you're solving for on both sides of the problem. But in this case though, the variable that I'm solving for is only inside the left side. So this is going to work perfectly. So when I have a quantity squared equal to this number on the other side, then that means that this quantity itself, x minus 1/2, that equals positive or negative square root of that quantity. And the square root of 81/4 is just 9/2. So what I get is x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus 9/2. And then just like we did a few minutes ago, we can move this negative 1/2 over to be right there. So then we'll get x equals positive 1/2 plus or minus 9/2. And then that means, what that means is there's two answers. There's either 1/2 minus 9/2, which is negative 8/2, or it could be 1/2 plus 9/2, which is 10/2. And then those two answers, they break down. Negative 8/2 is just negative 4, and 10/2 is just 5. And remember, do not put parentheses around them, because if you put parentheses around them, that means x and y. But these answers are both x. So don't put parentheses around them. Just put those in the box with a comma between them, but don't put anything else around them. Just put a comma between them. All right, now let's try another problem, number 17. So 17 says that you have a ball is tossed into the air. A ball is tossed into the air 40 feet per second. 40 feet per second from a height of 6 feet. From a height of 6 feet. And it says, how long will the ball to reach the ground? So the formula for the ball is s equals negative 16t squared plus the velocity, which is 40, the initial velocity, times time, plus the initial height, which is 6. So I'm plugging those numbers into the formula, but remember, whatever you have for 40, you'll change that to whatever you have. Whatever you have instead of 6, you'll change that instead of using 6. And so it says, when does the ball hit the ground? So the ball hits the ground when the ball is at 0, right? So you're going to set that equal to 0, and then you're going to have to solve it. So to solve it, I could divide the whole equation by -2. So I'm going to divide this by -2 and divide that by -2. So then I'll get positive 8 t squared minus 20t, and then positive 6 divided by -2 is -3 equals 0. Because 0 divided by -2 is 0. Now at this point in time, you have to maybe try to factor it. 24. So I don't think it factors. So let me try doing the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 ac all over 2a. So the a and the b and the c, those are the 3 numbers in the problem. So a equals 8, but you don't include the t with the a, just the number itself. The b equals -20, and the c equals the -3. So if I plug those all in, I would get -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. That. So I would get positive 20 plus or minus square root of 400 plus 32 times 3 is 96 all over 16. So 400 and plus 96, I think that's the problem. I don't think there's a square root of 400 plus 96. So let's go down there and let's keep on solving. So let me erase some of this. I don't need that anymore. So let's see. 20 plus or minus the square root of 496 divided by 16. So let's find the square root of 496. So let me type that into my calculator real fast. And I'll do square root of 496, 22.27. So it's approximately equal to 20 plus or minus 22.271 over 16. Now the problem is that if I do 20 minus 22, I'll get a negative. Now I knew I threw the ball up into the air, and then after that it fell on the ground. So the time won't be negative. So that represents something happening in the past, if like the ball had been dropping down from the sky earlier or something. But right now though, the only time that I want is a positive time. So I'm not gonna do the negative, I'm just gonna do the positive. So that means that I'll just do only do 20 plus 22.271 over 16. Now 20 plus 22.271 that's 42.271. So 42.271 over 16 is approximately 2.64. But the answer only needs 1 decimal point. So round to the nearest tenth. So this answer approximately is 2.6. So if you have a problem like this, just plug in your numbers and then round your answer off to 1 decimal place. So for me, 1 decimal place would be 2.6. Let me write that 6 better. So 2.6. There we go. Now let's try problem 18. So problem 18. Problem 18 says that you have the square root of y minus 9 plus the square root of y equals 9. So we're going to get the biggest and worst square root all by itself first. So to do that, we're going to move that one over there. So we're going to get the square root of y minus 9 equals 9 minus the other square root of y. Then we're going to take the square of both sides. So if I square a square root, it just crosses out the square root. That and that cancel out. So I'm left with y minus 9. Now, if you square a group of two things, it's called a binomial. What happens is that this square applies to this, and you get 81, but then you leave a blank space in the middle. So blank space, then you square this, negative becomes positive, and if you square the square root of y, you'll just get y. But then in the middle of it, though, this is the critical part. A lot of people forget the middle. You have to distribute this 2, not as an exponent, but just as a multiple. So distribute this 2 times the 9, that makes 18. And then you take that 18 times this, you get negative 18 square root of y. So that's what you get when you square the binomial is you get the first one squared, then a blank space, and then the last one. Then in the blank space, you distribute the power of 2, not as a power anymore, but just as a regular number times both of the things inside. And now you're going to get the other smaller square root of y by itself. So we're going to subtract this y from both sides, and that goes away. Then you'll, you're left then with negative 9 equals 81 minus 18 square root of y. Then you have to subtract 81 from both sides. So then you're left with negative 90 equals negative 18 square root of y. So let me go up there. If I divide both sides of that equation by negative 18, and then I bring it up to the top of the right side, then I'll have, it'll go into it 5 times. So negative 90 divided by negative 18 is positive 5. But then this side crosses out. So you're left with 5 equals the square root of y. Now to get rid of a square root of y, you have to square both sides. So I square this side again. So remember, I used 1 square to get rid of the big square root first. And then at the end of the problem, you'll use 1 more square to get rid of the little square root. So then you'll have 25 equals y. And then you should, whenever you solve square root problems, you should always check your answer, because sometimes the answer is called an extraneous solution. So sometimes the answer doesn't work. So let's go ahead and check this answer. So check. So if I plug in the 25 in the original problem, I'll have 25 minus 9 square rooted plus the square root of y again, which would be the square root of 25, equal to 9. And the square root of 25 minus 9 is the square root of 16. And the square root of 25 is just 5. But the square root of 16 is 4. So you have 4 plus 5 equals 9. So that answer does work. So that means you can go ahead and put a box around that answer. So the correct answer is 25. Now let's do problem 19. So 19 says t to the negative 3 halves equals 8. So when you solve a letter that has a reciprocal on it, what you do is you flip this power over and you put it on the opposite side. So t equals 8 to the negative 2/3 power. So instead of negative 3 halves, you flip it over and it's negative 2/3. So now you may ask yourselves, well, how do you do 8 to the negative 2/3? Well, remember, an exponent has 3 different parts. It has a root in the bottom. So you're gonna, if it's a 3 in the bottom, that means you'll do the cube root, right? In other words, a cube root is another way of saying the third root. Then, secondly, the top number, right? The top number, that represents the power, right? So you'll do the square, right? You'll square it. Or in other words, another way of saying square is to say the second power. And then the third step you do, that negative in the exponent, a negative in the exponent just means that you take the reciprocal. Take the reciprocal. So let's try it. So start with 8. So I'm going to start with 8. So 8 is at the top. Then I'm going to take the cube root of 8. The cube root of 8 is 2. Now I'm going to square the 2. That'll be 4. Now I'm going to take the reciprocal of 4, which is 1/4. So the answer is t equals 1/4. So the answer is 1/4. All right, well, good job. Now let's do problem 20. So problem 20 says -6 z minus 3 greater than 2z minus 6. So first of all, you have to distribute this through the parentheses. So -6z, and then negative times negative is positive 18 greater than 2z minus 6. So I'm going to subtract the smaller one from both sides. We'll get negative 8z plus 18 greater than, this crosses out, so it's just greater than -6. Then I'll subtract 18 from both sides. And then I'll have -8z greater than -6 plus -18 is -24. Now I'm going to divide by -8. Now I'm highlighting this in blue because there's something different about this. When you divide or multiply an inequality by a negative number, it actually makes the inequality itself become negative compared to what it was before. So the next answer is actually going to be a different inequality. It's going to be this -8 crosses out, so you have z. This -24 divided by -8 is +3, but the inequality itself is now different because I divided it by a negative. So this greater than sign now becomes a less than sign. So the answer to this is actually z is less than 3, but you have to represent z is less than 3 as a number line. So on a number line, here you have the 3, and then it's less than 3. So it's going this, it's not even touching 3 at all. It's going below 3, everything below 3, but not ever quite touching 3. So it goes left, less than 3. And then that is called an interval. So this is how you graph the graph. So one of your answers is going to say, make a graph of it. The other answer will say, find the solution in interval notation. So the left side of this interval is -infinity. The right side of this interval is 3 with the parentheses beside it. So your interval notation, therefore, is parentheses around it, and then -infinity, comma 3, close parentheses. So that's the interval notation. So you'll have to do the solution in the interval notation representing all the numbers that are below 3. And you'll also have to do, for the other part of the answer, you also have to do the graph on a number line, which I think that one is multiple choice. Now let's do 21. So 21 says absolute value of 6 minus 4x less than or equal to 1. So when you have an absolute value less than or equal to a positive number, that means you can put the absolute value itself is either between a positive or a negative number of that same number. So I can put this into what's called a conjunction. So it's a conjunction between two numbers, one negative and one positive. So in order to solve it, now I don't want to add x to both sides because then x won't be by itself anymore. So I can subtract 6, but instead of 2 sides like an equation has normally, this inequality has 3 sides. So I'm going to subtract 6 from all 3 sides. Okay, negative 7 less than or equal to, this cancels out, negative 4x less than or equal to negative 5. But now I'm going to divide by negative. Now remember, I'm doing this in a different color to highlight something's different. Whenever you divide an inequality or multiply an inequality by a negative number, the inequality itself also changes. So negative 7 over negative 4 is positive 7/4. And then this sign changes from less than or equal to being greater than or equal to, because I divided it by a negative. So this crosses out to have x. This inequality also changes to be greater than or equal to. And then this over this is 5 over 4. So the answer is x is between 5 over 4 and 7 over 4. So if you look at that solution set, now it can't equal them, right? You notice that it has the equal sign underneath it. So there's going to be a bracket on both of those numbers representing the fact that it does touch those numbers and it does equal them. So it's going to be from 5/4, which is, you have to put the smallest one first, all the way to 7/4. And then you have a bracket on both sides. So that's your solution to the inequality. And then you also have to draw that on a number line. So you're going to have 5/4 on a number line, then you'll have 7/4 on a number line. Now 5/4 and 7/4 are a little bit hard to find, because 5/4 is actually a little bit to the right of 1. 7/4 is actually a little bit to the left of 2. So you're going to find this on the graph somewhere between 1 and 2. And then you're going to have brackets that go, let me do blue brackets actually. You're going to have brackets that go from 5/4 to 7/4. And then it's going to be shaded between those brackets. So it's going to look kind of narrow. So 5/4 to 7/4. That's 21. Now we have one more inequality. This last inequality was called a conjunction. The next inequality is called a disjunction. So 22 is the last review problem for you. It says the absolute value of x minus 7 over 4 is greater than 1. So when you have an absolute value of a quantity greater than a positive number or 0, or a negative number or anything, when it's greater than something, then it's called a disjunction. So you break it into 2 parts. So instead of putting it between something, you put it to the left of -1, or you put it to the right of +1. So now you can't be to the left of something and to the right of something at the same time. So, you can't be to the left of a negative number at the same time you're to the right of a positive number. So this is why this problem separates into 2 different pieces, which is why it's called a disjunction. So I'm going to solve this by multiplying everything by 4. So just like we did before, the least common denominator is 4. So multiply everything by the least common denominator. And when you do that, this goes out. This goes out. So you're left with x minus 7 by itself is less than -1 times 4 is -4. Or here, the other side of the equation is x minus 7 is greater than 1 times 4, which is 4. Now you're going to add 7 to all 4 sides. So now we have 4 sides instead of just 3. So you have x less than 3, and then x is greater than 11. So on a number line, the number line, let me actually erase the top part of it so you can see the number line better instead of cramming it into the bottom. So the number line actually has 2 sides. So one side of it is 3, and everything below 3 is shaded. The other side is 11. So everything below 3 but not quite touching 3 is shaded. Then everything above 11, whoops, I'm sorry, I touched 11, just hold on a second. So everything above 11, but not quite touching 11, all those things are shaded as well. Yeah. So there's two different halves. So the number line looks like that for your solution, but then the hard part is actually the solution itself, because there's two parts of the solution itself, meaning you have to put a union symbol between them. So the first part of the solution is over here on the left side of this graph. You see that's negative infinity. So negative infinity all the way to 3. So negative infinity all the way to 3, and it doesn't touch 3, so you'll put a parenthesis. Then you do a union, and then the other half is from 11 all the way to positive infinity. So you're going to do parenthesis 11 because it doesn't touch 11, so that's why you do a parenthesis instead of a bracket. Then it goes all the way to infinity. So you have two different parts of your solution because it's a disjunction. There's two parts. So the solution to the problem 22 that I have in my example is parentheses negative infinity comma 3, close parentheses, union, open parentheses, 11 comma infinity, close parentheses. And then the number line, of course, you'll just do a multiple choice and you'll pick the correct number line. So that's the end of the review of my review video for that I have the problems that I have prepared for you for reviewing for your first test in college algebra. Very best wishes to you, and God bless you.